Hey, well today I'm angry because the S&P just hit a new all-time high. And why, you might ask, is that bad news? Surely that's good news. It isn't. It's good news for the few of us who own stocks, who own financial assets. The rest of us are getting crushed. And this is in response to this COVID-19 pandemic. The government's response has been to shovel money out the door in an attempt to mitigate the effects of this disaster. But their shoveling money out the door has been to favored entities. Of course, as always, unsurprisingly. And yet, we are still surprised because the scale of this brazen transfer has never been greater. $6.5 trillion has been generated so far. And by generated, I mean generated in the sense that you might generate funds with a printer in your home. They have just created this money out of thin air. And what have they done with it? They've given it to favored entities. The Catholic Church, for example, has gotten between $1.5 and $3.5 billion. The Catholic Church. Other favored entities. There's talk now about the commercial bond market being bailed out. Now, this is actually a good microcosm of the problem. Why would you bail out the owner of the mortgage and not the occupant of the building? Does that make any sense to you? It's increasingly making less and less sense to those of us on the streets. The government is completely out of control. They decide to create trillions of dollars out of thin air, send them to favored entities, and we are expected to pay this back. Now, the reason that all this debt hasn't really had an impact on us is because interest rates are zero. So if debts double, the interest that you pay doesn't change. You don't get the signal that you can't afford the debt. The debt just continues to grow. At some point, the world is going to demand a real interest rate from US debt securities. And at that point, it's over. We cannot pay interest of any amount on the huge amount of trillions that we owe. And these trillions have just gone straight into financial assets. Gold is up, silver is up. The S&P is at all-time highs. Here's an example of the S&P, and you can see the dramatic drop when the scale of the COVID-19 disaster became apparent. We're back to all-time highs. We are back to all-time highs. How is that possible? The economy is still shut down. Many, far more than you would ever wish to know, many businesses have shut down. Many more are struggling on, but will shut down. This economy contracted by a third in the second quarter. Contracted by a third in the second quarter. And the Fed's response, send money to favored entities. This is a disaster for us. I mean, the $6.5 trillion that has been summoned forth out of thin air, this money has not gone to us. This equates to about $20,000 for every person in the country. How much of that $20,000 did you get? I mean, some of us got $1,200 one time. Some of us got help on our unemployment insurance. The fact is, corporations got millions, tens of millions, and the laws were flouted. Many corporations skirted the law in order to get funds. What happened to the people? How is it that the homeowner is left holding the bag while the person who holds the mortgage is paid off? How does that make any sense at all? You know, the '08 recession was just another example of exactly what's happening now. These crises provide an opportunity for huge sums of money to be transferred to favored entities. This money doesn't even exist. It was summoned forth like the sorcerer's apprentice, and it's going to be the end of us. At some point, the world is going to demand a real interest rate on American debt securities, and it is over at that point. We cannot pay any interest. We can't even afford to get by with interest rates at zero. But the S&P is at all-time highs. Rah, everybody's happy, except the vast majority of us who don't own any stocks in the S&P 500. What's to become of us? Does anybody care? Are we to be the new homeless? It's time that we realize that the situation is spiraling out of control. Every crisis, the transfer of wealth becomes greater and greater, and it's from poor to rich. I mean, communism has failed, but at least you can sympathize with the objective of trying to flatten the field, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. It sounds like a noble objective, unless you're rich, of course. But here we are, robbing from the poor to give to the rich. How on earth is this America? How does this comport with our image of ourselves? This is going to end badly. It's impossible to describe the consequences if we don't retain or restrain our government and get control of its spending, it will be the end of us. It might be the end already. It's impossible for us to pay back the debt that we owe, but rah, the S&P is at all-time highs. God bless all of you who own stocks. Please, let's wake up.